Good morning, Hacksters! It's my favorite day of the week. It's Tuesday. We've got a Hackster Cafe for you, and this week's guest is Abigail Edgecliffe-Johnson, the creator of lots of robotic and electronic cakes, which is such. Oh, we're going to take a look at a bunch of them today. Abigail, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. This is such fun.
My pleasure. Okay, so you have attained a following on Instagram for making these uh robotic cakes of various types, including this Dungeons and Dragons cake, which you just published a tutorial on Hackster. I'm very excited to check that out. That features, it doesn't just animate, it is an actual playable game. Is that right?
Yes. So I really enjoy it when you can play with your food. And because cakes are always a centerpiece. And if they're just sitting there, you sort of look at it and you're like, yay, that's pretty. Way more fun if you can just kind of mess with it. Because the number of people that want to walk up to a cake and touch it is alarming. So it's like, no, 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 you can
Mm.
touch it. Just touch this part, not that part.
Is that how you got started? You were like, I love cake, but I wish that I could touch it more.
Oddly, no. Um, I'd always made cakes. Ever since I was little, and they would get sort of more elaborate, the princess cakes and all that sort of thing. And then when I, two things kind of came together. When I had my own startup, I started working with a lot of people who were coders and, builders and hardware people. Um, and so I started learning from them. I started learning Arduino from them and all that good stuff. And then simultaneously, I had also been watching Ace of Cakes, the Duff
Ah.
Goldman, and I watched them put a roller coaster kind of in and around a cake. And I was like, I
Ooh.
can do that. And so actually the first one I made that moved, I just took a disco ball motor, um, and I sort of used that as the center of the cake so that the rather than having the disco ball hanging this way, the disco ball motor was here. And then I just suspended stuff off of it because that was before I knew how to like put motors together and run them off of anything. So that was a solar system cake. Um,
Mm.
and that one was super fun. And it just got worse. And then I just started because my starting point is always what would be funny, and then I kind of go from there. And it's all about like why would this be amusing to someone, and mostly, well, first, why would it be amusing to me, and then how would it be amusing for somebody else?
Perfect.
Yeah.
And your title of your website is Engineering Joy, engineerofjoy.com, and on your LinkedIn, you're like, yeah, Engineering Joy.
Yeah, I had been doing these cakes for a while, and I had been doing them mostly for, my own family and friends. And a couple of girlfriends of mine who are very sort of startup land-y sat me down and they were like, so here's the thing, you're going to stop doing everything else you're doing and you're
Mm.
just going to do cakes on purpose. And I was like, okay, because it was COVID, why not? And and it was actually Cindy Gallup who gave me the name Engineer of Joy, because she was like, that's what you do. You are an engineer of joy, because I'm not a real engineer in the kind of classical educated sense.
Mm.
I'm not trained as a mechanical or electrical or computer engineer. I'm just a dude or a lady, but still. Um, yeah, and so it just kind of came to it that way. And that's how the name came up. Although I will ask you and others to weigh in, thinking of changing the website name to Dimensional Sugar,
Ooh.
which I kind of like.
I do love that. I feel like it doesn't quite capture the fact that you like go the extra mile and like animate these things, because it makes me think of, there's people that I follow that like make sugar out of flowers out of sugar, which are really these, you've
Good
probably
point.
seen them. Which I love the sound of it though. Like dimensional is such a strong, cool word. And at the same time, I feel like you've got this whole extra side to it that is so remarkable. Uh, that's my personal 2 cents. Everyone, you can chime in the comments.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, and yeah, actually, the this other thing is that I'm also not a professional. Well, I mean, I'm professional now because people pay me, but I'm not a professionally trained baker either.
Mm.
So everything I've done, from the baking side of things and the cake decorating side of things and the electronic side of things, is all self-taught, which is
Yeah.
why I really appreciate the 800 million tutorials that there are on the internets. both on the electronic and on the baking side. Like I learned how to work with isomalt through tutorials.
What is isomalt?
Isomalt is it's it's a sugar mixture. It's not a sugar substitute because it is sugar, but it's a sort of stable sugar substitute that you can use to make hard candies. So like
Oh.
lollipops, because if you try and make boiled sugar things, it's really easy to mess them up, and they don't reheat and remelt very well. So if you're working with a mold or something and it doesn't come out perfectly, you have to remake the entire sugar syrup to do that.
Mm.
Isomalt, it just works, and you can melt it and remelt it and remelt it. So I have like unicorn horns that I've made to light up, and then I only needed 3, but I made 5 in case they broke. You just melt them down and start again. And so isomalt is fantastic. And on my Instagram, you can see there's a picture of my fingers where I have burned myself with both isomalt and hot glue,
Oh
because that's how I
no.
live. But I have learned now the glove situation, which is that you wear a cotton glove and then you wear a rubber glove over it when you're working with isomalt, because it gets
Ah.
insanely hot. And because it's sugar, it sticks. So if you burn yourself, it will stay there for a very long time while you scream loudly.
Oh no. Oh, it's like within fire art communities. It's like don't wear synthetics because they will melt and stick to you.
Exactly. That's exactly
Wow.
the same. Yeah.
That's a solid glove tip.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Safety first, kids.
Yeah, and as someone who makes, I've gotten burned by US Customs in the past for bringing in Kinder eggs where they're really mad about, like, you putting stuff that's not food inside of food, and I
Hmm.
imagine you confront this as well. How do you make the, electronics in the cake be, like, safe and, like, especially if there's gonna be kids around or
Yeah, so they're always isolated. I always isolate the electronics from the cake. And one of the things in any kind of fancy molded sculpted cake, there are always non-food elements because you need an armature to make things stand up. So any kind of big
Right.
sculpted cakes that you've seen, they'll have copper piping, they'll have wiring. A lot of times they'll have styrofoam. So if you've ever seen a kind of massive multi-tiered cake, 80% of that is styrofoam.
Mm,
So there is sort of tradition and acceptability in the kind of mix of food and non-food items, as long as you put barriers between the food and the non-food. So my enclosures are always 3D printed, um, because you can print in PLA. I only ever print in PLA, and so my printer has only ever known PLA. So it's less contaminated than it would be if I was switching materials a lot. PLA is technically food safe.
hmm.
Um, I wouldn't make your dinnerware out of it, but one, I guess, theoretically should or could. Not should, definitely not should. But I print it and then I wash it. Um,
Mm.
and then prior to it going onto a cake, there's always, I don't have any, well, here, I can show you, some of the things, right? This is a basic cake board.
Mhm.
Um, you put cakes on cake board all the time. This is a sort of plasticky material, but it's a food safe plasticky material, so nothing is crossing over barriers, right? So when I do a cake with any electronic components, you can use a cake board as a barrier. There's like, they're really thin um, boards that you might have seen at bakeries. They're like white cardboard and they're very thin, and they're up
Right.
there, which is why I'm not getting them, because they're really high and I have to climb on a chair to get them. Um, but those, so you build your cake, you put a cake board, then you can put a component layer that is also covered in plastic wrap, which is funny because plastic is food safe, but it's petroleum. But
Mm.
so you're putting that around it. So if I put fondant icing or regular icing, um, it's never actually touching PLA or electronics. And then I also will put like a dowel through the center of a cake to keep everything steady, or sometimes a PVC pipe if I need to run wiring. So again, there's like things that are in contact with the cake that are food safe, and then things that are not food safe or isolated. That's a very
PVC
long
pipe.
answer.
Is there a specific place that you source PVC pipe in, like, that type of diameter? Is it just
Um,
Home
yes,
Depot
this is
or
Home Depot, baby. Yeah.
Oh!
So this is my little, yeah, and I have my pipe cutter, which is the greatest tool ever, because cutting this with
Mm.
like a Dremel or something, you just get uh, sort of not what's the PVC equivalent of sawdust? You get that
Oh, yeah.
everywhere. Um,
Ooh.
but you use one of the cutters and it works really, really well and it's easy. Um, so I use those. I use wooden dowels, which are great because you can sharpen them in a pencil sharpener to go through the center of the cake and into a cake board, which is why this one has a hole in it because you just
Brilliant!
right in there.
Pencil sharpener plus dowel.
Yeah,
Brilliant. Oh,
yeah,
I'm
it's
getting so
brilliant.
many tips already. So you're self-taught, but you also have all this, like, domain expertise at this point that, like, nobody else really does.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to be able to combine these things, and it's what is really enjoyable for me is that I have to learn new things every time because I don't like repeating myself.
Mhm, mhm.
And particularly because the cakes are always for someone. So you're building something that will make someone else laugh. That was for Cindy Gallup. She has a shirt that says "Fuck you, pay me," which is hilarious. So for her birthday, on a year that she was about to launch a fundraising drive for her site, that was her mantra was "Fuck you, pay."
Mm.
And so that cake came about because we had a whole discussion about what she was excited about, what she was into, and so the thing I really like about that cake is it looks like cake, it just looks like a big square
Mhm.
cake, and you don't know there's anything happening until you hit the button, and then it says "fuck you, pay me," which makes me really happy because you know, it's a little surprise, it makes you laugh, but it really speaks to kind of who she is and what she was doing. And so, yeah, I get to learn how to do all of these things sort of new because I'm trying to make somebody else laugh because I'm trying to fit in with their ideas and ideals.
A lot
So,
of the so what percentage of this cake would you say is, like, cake?
that one is, I don't know, like 90% cake because
All of it.
I can show you on
Ooh.
this one, which is a similar, sorry, this is similar to what I built for that cake. There we go. I'm like, ooh, there we
Whoa.
go. This one is the one I actually just did another one for her this year, which let's see, is this? Let me turn it on. In fact, uh, oh yeah, no, I even put the switch on the outside, but I forgot that I did. So this is a fairly thin, it's like an inch and a half wide component layer, but this one sits on the front, and this one, when you push the button, um, all right, I'm going to shut off because it's
I
loud.
love it.
But so this is the kind of thing that would go on that cake, right? Like, so it's completely enclosed. The only thing with this one is because it has sound, I had to have little air holes. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Mm.
So that the sound could travel through, which meant that when I iced the cake, I had to keep that super, super thin so you could actually hear it. And I've got two speakers in there because one speaker was not enough. And we could have a whole discussion about the problems with this design. But um, so when I do a cake, I can add this to the front of the cake and then kind of cake around it and behind it. And so the cake can be large or small. I'm trying to see if I think Cindy's cake is probably up on the Instagram. It might be up on my website. Oh, yeah, there it is. Um, so yeah, that's what it looks like in
I'm
situ.
really
So
curious. You said, there's problems with it. If you were to remake this, what would you, do differently?
the number one thing I would do differently is I would have it the base that I just did for the Dungeons and Dragons cake was a laser cut wooden base. And I did that so that I could effectively run power channel underneath. Um, because there are two speakers in this one, and what I did not know, because I still learn every day,
Mm.
is that when you turn this on with nothing happening, without pushing the button, without doing anything else, the speakers are drawing huge amounts of current. Huge amounts meaning like if you leave this
Oh.
with its three little AAA batteries, or yeah, AAA,
Mm.
it just is drawing down power the entire time, and so it gets weaker and weaker as you go. The
Mm.
sound gets weaker and weaker, and so what I didn't realize was how much power draw was happening, which if I mathed better, I would have known that in advance, but I
Yeah.
didn't check that because ordinarily I make a I make the mechanism and then I'll test it. Um, like I'll stick it on my desk, let it run, and just time how long it'll run for so that I know, right? If I were to do that again, I would either have a power base underneath or I would have used a little lipo, a nice 2500 milliamp lipo situation. But I didn't. And so it was a little stressful.
Oh,
um,
yeah.
so yeah, I would have done that differently. And then also, what I would have done differently is if I had built that base, I would have just put the speakers in the base rather than
Mm.
having them in here, because then I wouldn't have had to think about the icing muffling the sound,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it's weird that you end up like knowing how to do like cake stuff, engineering sort of technical stuff, sound mixing stuff. There's a really fun website that I'm now forgetting the name of, but it allows you to make your own karaoke mixes. And what's great about that is that you can pull in, and I'll see if I can find it while we're chatting, but you can pull in a song and then just say, I only want to have the vocals and the bass drum, or the vocals and lead guitar, which means that you
Ooh.
can make a really strong sound without it being muddy, because on these speakers it's quite muddy. um, and so you actually get, I'm just looking this up to see if I can find it.
Mm.
Also, I have to know how to spell karaoke again. Oh, it's called karaoke version. um,
Oh, yes.
yeah, karaoke version. um, yeah, so and they have all the songs, and it's like $2.90 or something to buy a tune, and then you can download it in multiple versions, because for this you need a wave file. um
Ah.
but yeah, and so that's been brilliant, as because I end up using sound a lot, because
Huh.
sound is really fun. Yeah, because people aren't expecting a cake to make sound, so it makes them laugh.
Yeah, there's a really amazing, public domain, the BBC Sound Archive. They have this open archive of all these different sound effects that you can use, I think this is it, and it's all public domain, and you can just download, and they've got
I
all
love
this
it.
bizarre stuff, like different kind. I looked up, like, cats meowing and purring and, like, trains going by and, like, storm sounds. They've got this old, theater effect of, like, a
Oh,
cannonball rolling across a wooden floor that they used to use for thunder.
oh my god, I love it.
It's amazing.
That's
Um,
brilliant. Yeah,
but
for the D&D cake, sorry, I was just gonna say, for the
oh, no, yeah.
D&D cake, I was going to put sound. So initially, I had like a sword swishing sound for when the little cleric went
Ooh.
back and forth. It was like, and then when it was gonna be a dragon, I had like a dragon roaring sound. Um, but then, as I said in the post, it was going to a bowling alley
Oh,
where it was
yeah.
very loud, and so I the sound would have gotten lost, and it wouldn't have made sense. It just, if the cake was dependent on the sound to make it make sense, it wouldn't have worked, because you wouldn't have heard anything, right? So when you're thinking about building this stuff, it's not just sort of how do you do it, but then where is it going? How's it going to be used? Who's it for? Are they going to understand it? But it's fun.
How did it go off?
Awesome. It was so
Nice.
awesome.
I would
They were
be just out
delighted.
of my mind, so excited, and so you can actually there's the when the cube wins versus when the cleric wins, they've got different, uh,
Little actions.
little actions,
And
yeah.
they each, it's a best of 5, or a best 2 5, really. He just goes.
I gotta
um
this is the best, though.
it's the best.
How do you make it do this?
That. It's my favorite thing in the entire world.
It's so good.
I'm just gonna put Jello on everything from here on in.
They've got
So
this wonderful, like, Tinkercad diagram of what the whole system looks like, but what's underneath here? Is that, like, a DC motor going back and forth or a servo?
it's a servo. So on
Ah,
both, it's actually a servo. Initially, I thought I would use a vibration motor,
uh-huh,
because I thought that would be enough to make it jiggle, or like it would wiggle in a fun way. But it's actually really solid. And although, like, so I tested it with water initially, and water worked great, but it's
mhm,
too solid and it's too heavy,
mm.
because that's about 2 cups of water in there.
Right.
And yeah, so it's really heavy, and so the vibration motor was just, like, not strong enough. It wasn't doing anything. It made a lot of noise, but it didn't do anything. And I noticed, when I was trying to figure out how to do this, because I made some and just kinda took a hunk and threw it on things to see what would happen. If I poked it, it worked really well, and I thought, "Okay, how can I have the effect of poking it?" Right? And that's how I came up with the sweep solution, because it's, you know, your basic sweep program that you would get on like every servo example ever.
Mm.
So the cleric is like a 90-degree sweep, and that one's like a 30-degree sweep.
So you mentioned that you started out with Arduino projects, and I'm curious, what was your first Arduino project? We talked about the sweep example.
Uh, okay, let me think. Go back to my Instagram. What's the first thing on there?
Oh, yeah, fair.
I think there's probably a Minecraft cake
Oh my.
somewhere. There were definitely at least two Minecraft cakes in my world. Um, one of which
Look at this.
was,
Sorry, I got distracted
oh,
'cause
yeah, I love that one. So my best work is when I work with people who are smarter and better than me. And this is with my friend Lorenzo, who is a certified genius. And somebody came to me and they said, I want a birthday cake for my grandson's 3-year-old birthday party. But it was a big like family reunion type situation, and it was going to be his birthday at the same time it was going to be his grandson's birthday. And the grandson was obsessed with a red Ferrari. Oh yeah, you can just about hear there's sound on
Yeah, I
that one
just turned it
too.
up so we could get the, because it says, what is it without actual racing noises?
Yeah, so it does like
Okay,
a start your engines, and then they make rooming noises, and
so good.
it's randomized so that the not each, you know, it's like each car wins differently, right? It's not the same car every time. And
Nice.
they do like a little, you know, and that one was so fun because apparently the kids played with it for like a half an hour at the party.
Nice. That's the
Um,
dream.
it's the dream. That's what I want. I want to be the entertainment for your kids' party. And what's fun about that one is that was delivered at the same time to the same place for the same party as the weightlifting beaver,
What?
which, so that's right next to it. The grandfather calls for the cake for his grandson. The son, the father, calls and says, "My dad is so excited about this cake. Could you make one for him? He
Aw,
is a weightlifting septuagenarian who is obsessed with the fact that he went to MIT and has a brass rat. So he wears the brass rat all the time. He makes fun of his children because they did not go to MIT. They went to Harvard, poor things. And so I made him a weightlifting beaver because that is, when you are a weightlifting septuagenarian MIT alum, that is what you need.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that one has a knife switch, which are really fun to play with.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Oh, so this looks like, is this buttercream frosting?
That one's buttercream. Yeah. So I work in both fondant and buttercream. Some
So
people hate fondant. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was curious, like, it sounds like, I understand that there's, like, a time and a place, and maybe that's sort of, like, the way that things shake out. What do you think about that? I don't know.
I think it depends on the design.
Mm.
So fondant is a spectacular medium for putting on the front of one of these because it works like paper, in terms of its sort of transparency, translucency. Let's go with trans somethingsy. um, and um, it works incredibly well for like molding and doing very specific design. So I use stencils on some of my cakes, um,
Ah.
for sort of fine detail stuff. But I think on that racing cake, the decorations are a mix of stencils and fondant.
Oh, yes.
Um, yeah, because like getting all of those little, so all of that like maple, Frederick, etc. Those are made to look like the stickers that would go on a race car, but it's actually the name of all the kids that were going to be at the party.
That's so cute.
And Philip is 3, so it's Philip's Formula 3. Get it?
I love the
So
pH formula. There's so many little touches on this that are so good. And is this a Spark Fun big red button, by the way?
I think it is a Spark Fun big red
I
button.
love those.
Yeah,
They're
I mean,
so
there's nothing better than a giant button. And if
everywhere.
you're, again, you're a small child, you just want to go poof,
Yeah, yeah,
which is why it's not on the cake; it's next to the cake.
yeah. Right, yeah. That also seems like something that was learned over time. You got some more stencils going on over here. And this one has, uh, actually got some little vapor coming out of the chimney on it, which I love. Can you tell us about that cake?
Yeah, I'm gonna see. I just updated my own site yesterday
Oh, nice.
because I'm super organized. Oh, and it
I
wants
think
me to
it's
find
been,
it.
like,
It's kind of
multiple years since I did
yeah.
mine, so
All right, I'll see if maybe I'll if you talk longer, I'll figure out how to pull up that page. But
cool, yeah.
basically, that one Oh, that one's a really fun one to talk about. But the
We're gonna go there for
the
sure.
one with the vapor in it. So I've played with, and the one that actually we could talk about next is the had a smoke machine in it. But this one,
Ooh.
so I've played with smoke machines before, and they're not as fun as I want them to be, and they're really hard and messy. Um,
Mm.
but a piezo humidifier is phenomenally effective at making something that looks like smoke, and it works instantly in the way that a smoke machine sort of a okay, when I do a smoke machine, I base it off a vape cartridge. So I
Ah.
get to hang out in the nicest shops and talk to the nicest people. I'm like, no, I just need the cartridge. I don't care what's in it. I'm gonna dump out, everything that's in there and put glycerin in instead. Um, and I can't remember her name, but there's a woman who does cosplay tutorials, and that's how I learned how to make the vape-based mini smoke machine.
Ooh.
Um, and her name's something like Tatiana, but it's probably not. I'm terrible with names.
Mm.
But the cake with the little house and the smoke in it is a sound activated um, light and smoke situation because it was for a party of a women's network. Where again, that stencil is the names of all 410 members of the women's network.
Ah.
Um, and the idea for their year was kind of women together and like coming together to do things. And so that one, yeah, that's all of their first names. First and last did not fit because it would have been like teeny, teeny, tiny. And so when you cut that stencil, which I have a little BMO laser cutter that I use for that. Um, it's so small that you wouldn't have gotten any detail. So for that one, it's a tempered chocolate house that I just,
Ooh.
flattened out some tempered chocolate, cut it, built a little house. And then that again sits on a component layer, which is, an isolated component layer that has a reservoir for the water.
Ah.
And then you use these little filters to pull the water up from the reservoir onto the bottom of the piezo. And then the piezo sits right on top of the reservoir. And so as soon as you turn it on, you get smoke, which is what you don't get when you do a smoke machine. Um, thank you for my geekery.
Uh,
Yeah, it's super fun. And you get what's also nice about it is it doesn't smell. So when you do the smoke
mm.
machine one, you do get that like glycerin smoke machine
Yeah,
smell.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and it's not like great to be inhaling large quantities of it. Not that there's large quantities, but the vapor just disappears instantly. But that's why I wanted to put a light underneath it so you would really see it. And that's
Makes sense, yeah.
super fun. All right, tell me something magical for 2 minutes while I see if I can find the
Okay.
site
Well,
that I was going to show you.
I
But
try
you
not
might
to
know.
talk too much about, like, bring myself into these too much, but, I did talking about fondant reminded me and also of, like, so last Saturday was Arduino Day. Was it last Saturday? No, previous Saturday. Anyway, they had this amazing cake for Arduino Day, and,
That is
they
spectacular.
I know, right? But they also, it had a lot of fondant on it, and they had a lot of trouble cutting it because it had all this hardware in it, including these, like, super pointy skewers, which, like, I couldn't help but think of those, like, cake smashing things where someone, like, smushes someone's face into it, and I'm, like, just thinking about their eyeballs, and I'm like, "Oh, no." But I did get to eat the Arduino logo, which was made of fondant and very not tasty, so I totally understand that.
I'm so sorry.
That's my 2 minutes too. I don't think that was 2 minutes either, but, uh,
No, it's all right. I was so excited about what
whatever.
you were saying. I didn't actually turn it. What I'll do is
Yeah,
I'll throw in the comments a link to that page
cool.
that kind of describes, or I'll put up another tutorial on Hackster just for you on
Nice.
how I did that one because that again, like it turns out I am not good at stenciling because in order to stencil properly, your cake should be almost frozen. Um, and I'm doing all of this in my New York City apartment, so it's all very small. And we don't have a freezer that can accommodate a 12-inch high cake. So I have to do it in the fridge, which takes time. And um, it was funny because you had said, like, oh, have stuff to show. And I realized most of the time well, first of all, my favorite thing about this whole setup is that everything I make has to be destroyed. And I
Right.
love that. It makes me so happy that it's like, "Here is this. Please destroy it, make it into a million pieces, and then never talk about it again." Like or talk about it, but don't ever, like, touch it. Don't hold it, don't save it, don't keep it, It's it's Yeah, I like destruction. But but, it's also that you're doing all of this stuff, on an extraordinarily tight deadline because it has to get there, right? You have to show up to the party with the thing.
Mm.
There's no extending deadlines. There is no, do it later option. Like the time is the time and it has to be delivered. So it it creates interesting problems in kind of build and time management because I have to make sure that all of the electronics, like the design has to be done, and then the electronics have to be kind of tested and built and pushed together, and the enclosures have to be built, and then everything has to be tested, and then I have to make the cake,
Ah.
and then I got to put it in the cake, and then I have to pray that it works.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of doers.
No, there are no do-overs. I did a cake, again for that same women's network. I used a capacitive touch sensor,
Mm.
um, and was it? No, it was capacitive touch and like a conductive situation. Now I can't even remember what I did. Again, I
Mm.
followed a tutorial, but the way that that one worked is that one person touched one side of the cake board and one person touched the other side of the cake board, and then they touched each other, completing the circuit,
Yeah.
which then made the little doohickey on the top spin. And that was because the whole thing was about connection. So their theme that year was connection. And at the party, they made like, they understood this sort of you touch, and then you touch each other, yay, connection. And they said, great, let's have the whole party connect to
Oh.
150 people. And you're just like, I, I hope it works. And it worked. It worked.
Wow,
It was
nice.
great.
Wow, I'm surprised there wasn't, like, enough conductivity there, like, that's so cool.
Yeah. So it's that kind of stuff where you're like, I'm gonna,
Yeah.
and you hand it off to a party of children and you hope they don't smash it.
Too early anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, you've
You
got
just
this.
you gotta let it go.
Yeah. So, just a non-electronic question here. You, talked about testing the stencil for that cake on, this looks like a flat surface, but then you mentioned that you gotta put the cake in the freezer before you stencil on it, which implies to me that, like, you're stenciling onto a round surface. Is this, like, normal? Like, what kinds of stencil are you airbrushing? Like, how do you do it?
No. Badly? No, I wish I were better at it, but I'm getting there. Yes, so you're stenciling onto a round surface. My cakes are traditionally, I wanna say, like, I do a 6-inch round because they end up looking more elegant when you make them tall.
Mm.
7-inch round looks a little stubby. Um, yeah, um, and so you put your cakes in the fridge. If have room, you can put them in the freezer, but you put them in the fridge for as long as humanly possible to get the Swiss meringue buttercream really, really, really hard.
Mm.
Um, then you're wrapping your stencil. I use Mylar. Um, let's see if I can find. Yeah, it's the only good thing about being in a tiny apartment is everything is within reach. Um, so I just have these like really basic Mylar sheets,
Ah.
which I then put in my laser cutter. Um, and they cut really beautifully and cleanly. And then you wrap those around the cake and you can stick little pins into it to kind of hold it in place. And then you take a thinner buttercream, usually it's like heated slightly so that it's warmer and really squidgy. And then you put a thin layer of that over the top of the cake. And then that gets cold because of the cold from the cake transfers to the new buttercream you put on. And then you very, very carefully peel away and you hope for the best. Or in that case, you do it 4 times
Oh!
because it got messed up
Oh,
4
no.
times.
Well, it worked
And
definitely worked out well.
thank you. But the on that one also the interesting thing was that the electronics, are kind of buried in that little layer,
Mm.
and the lights obviously work beautifully, and that's fine. Um, but the humidifier was a little bit cranky. Yeah, there you go. That little cup on the side, which I'm pointing to, and you can't see what I'm pointing at, actually sits in the middle. Um, because again, part of it is like I have to build these things in like weird stages to get them all to work. And what goes on top is that NeoPixel ring and a little lid. And so the
Mm.
um, piezo
So this
sits
is, like, part of
inside
the
the NeoPixel ring kind of perfectly.
ah,
They perfectly fit together, and then that sits on top of a cap which has a little hole in it. The hole goes down through to the filter. Filter goes to the water. Um, but if the house wasn't sitting exactly right on top of the component layer, the smoke was not as enjoyable as you would have liked. And I also had to build like a little secret chocolate wall on the inside because when I built the house, I wanted to have as much light as possible shining through. But actually, when you looked through, what you saw was all the components, which was like, yeah,
ah,
you want to keep the illusion going, right? So I had to build like there's a little chocolate wall in there to make
oh
it
my
all
gosh, chocolate
secret.
architect,
I love
confectionery
building
roboticist,
gingerbread houses.
That's so
They're my
cool.
favorite thing. Gingerbread houses are the best because it's basically cardboard, but
Oh,
edible.
yeah.
So that gingerbread house that's on the site that is ginormous was actually for the Girl Scouts store on Fifth Avenue,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
a model of the Juliette Gordon Low birthplace,
Oh,
and
this
she's
one?
the founder. Yeah, she's the founder of the Girl Scouts, and that one actually had a playable app-based game, and I did that one with my friend Russell Monroe, who is an absolute genius. He built, if you can find it, he's in Australia, and he built a cake years ago that was a transformer cake that transformed.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's amazing and just a wonderful, supremely spectacular guy. And so we worked on that together. And he did all the coding for that because that was definitely beyond my capability. So I did the kind of design that, yeah, that one. He's brilliant.
Wow.
Um, and so yeah, somebody hooked us up, I think, because we were talking to a toy company sort of separately, and they were like, "You guys should hang out." um, yeah,
Ah.
isn't
Oh,
that
it's just
brilliant?
this is just the mechanism, though. I wanna see the
That's
cake
the
too.
mechanism. Yeah.
Ah, cool. So you use, laser cutting and 3D printing in your process. So you've got some great examples of both on here, actually. So for one, there's a you 3D printed some VR headsets for a school play so that because they have to borrow the, like, real ones, I guess. I would
Yeah.
be terrified as well. And
Yeah.
then you also have, like, a laser cut gears. Where'd it go? It's
Lower
around,
down
it's
on the
around.
roller skating cake, probably. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah,
There we
there we
go.
go. Yeah, roller skating cake. So first up, like, this is it doing its thing, and I was stumped as to how you did this at first, and then, I saw your post about it. It's so cool.
So you know the
And you actually ended
Snoopy.
up with, like, 3, didn't you, or something? I don't know.
Yeah, so I ended up using 2 gears and 1 fake gear because and someone who knows more than me can explain this, but whenever I made the 3 gear setup, it would sort of catch. Yeah. So
It's so
that's
cool, though.
when it works beautifully, it was beautiful and it was perfect. You can see the gears kind of through the 3D
I
printed.
love this video.
Um, I do too. It's so satisfying. Um, but when I would run it on a motor, they would catch. And
Um,
so and then it would freeze and there's not enough torque in that motor to actually push it, through whatever it was catching on. So I ended up just pulling one gear out and just using a circle instead that had a magnet on it. So there's magnets on the magnets on the gears attached to the magnets on the top, or sorry, the little screws, in fact, on the top. And then those little roller skates have screws on them. And then, yeah, as you can see, it uses that little inductive charging coil. And
and the
I'd
induction
like an
coil is
ad.
is is powering the LEDs, right?
That's right.
That's so
So,
cool!
I mean, have you seen the LEDs from like Adafruit sells
Yeah,
them? It's
I've
like
got some of
little,
those fingernail stickers.
yeah. So it's the little tiny, inductive LEDs. And I was like, I must find a way. These need to go on
Yeah.
a cake somehow. And that's what happens. Is like most of the stuff that I come up with is like I'll see something cool, and then I'll be like, how can I make it into a cake? Which is probably unhealthy. Yes.
Happiness is healthy, there we go.
Yeah. And it's just when you see that, you're like, "Oh my god, there's gotta be a way to use this on a
Yeah,
cake." It's so because it
absolutely.
solves that problem of wires, which are always a huge pain in the butt in a cake, is like, how do I put the wires? The only problem with the inductive coil is that the range is very, very small.
Mm.
So things have to be really close together. So, even having plastic on top of um, the little sort of skating surface, right? I had to make sure that that was like super, 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 super thin
Mm.
so that there was no, major barrier in between. And then once you put weight on it, that helps a little bit. But then that's little fondant ice skates. But I did have to tell the party, I was like, don't eat them. You can eat the top, don't eat the bottom. By the way, this is how I discovered general liability insurance. Because I did a cake for a kid who was really into Rube Goldberg machines and baseball. So I
Oh.
made a cake again with my friend Lorenzo, um, who what we did is there was a little funnel and you dropped a sort of Malteser, Whopper down a funnel and it ran through a little channel and a little like maze. And then it tripped brake beam sensor, which then started the motor going. And that you can just see the motor going and it 9 times out of 10 smacks the ball. And I actually liked the randomness of it. Lorenzo really wanted to go every time and is much, more particular than I am. And he was like, no, no, no. There should be a sensor that detects whether or not the ball has fallen. And I was like, just sometimes it'll hit, sometimes it won't. It's fine. So when I did the tests initially, the arm that was hitting the candy was pretty light. It was just made out of foam.
Mm.
And so the candies would just kind of go like bump, and that was lovely. And I did check with the parent in advance that it was okay that I like send projectiles to her house. Um, but then when I built the cake, I put fondant on that to make it, match with all of the other things, right? Because the brake beam sensor is inside that little sort of faucet tower looking thing.
Mm.
And the rest of it is sort of a mix of cardboard and fondant and chocolate. But when I put fondant on the paddle that would swing around, it gained a lot of weight, which meant that it gained a lot of speed and force. And so when you finally put it together, that thing didn't gently just go pop. It was like woof, and the ball went flying across the room. So I sent this cake off, and then I thought, oh God, what do I do if someone decides that what would be really fun is to bend down and try and catch it in their mouth, and
That's
then they lose an
exactly what I was
eye?
thinking.
And I'm having this like, oh God, oh God. And then I get a video from the mom
Oh, no.
who's like, he loves it. It's wonderful. And it's a video of him leaning down and getting it right in the face. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to get so sued. I didn't, amazingly. So yeah, general liability insurance is your friend. But they should always throw cake food at you.
There's so much more to talk about, but actually I want to take off of that, and this is not the first time that you've had a hardware business, and I would love to mention the fact that you are a hardware founder, which is hard, and you've been through this whole sort of grinder with it, and came through wanting to share your own experiences with others, which I think is amazing and admirable.
Thank you.
So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit of the story of the race cars and also your awesome sort of breakdown of that went on your Medium account. I'm curious.
Thank you. I had Ratio, which was an idea I had about teaching kids STEM through program or customizable race cars. We went back and forth through programmable, and I decided that for me, I learn best with hands-on tactile. Like I have to mess with something to learn it, and so I don't understand a concept unless I can sort of physically play with it.
Mm.
Um, and I wanted kids to be able to like really fully understand gear ratios and really fully understand torque and really fully understand friction and speed and all of these things in a tangible way, because that's how I learn. And I didn't love the cars and things that were based entirely on code because I thought they were too abstract,
Mhm.
and they didn't make the concepts as real as I would have liked them. So I built Racia. We did quite well for a while, and we ran into the thing that many founders run into, is that we did not raise enough money. And part of it was timing. I had built my STEM toy startup um, just at the tail end of people giving money to STEM toy startups, because a couple of them had tanked right around the same time. So investors were a bit skittish about STEM toys, which part of it, as I say in one of the other Medium posts, is to build a really high quality toy is incredibly expensive. And parents will say that they will spend $100 and up on a kid's toy. They are lying. They want to spend $29.99 and not a cent more.
Yeah.
And so to build, when I was looking at some cake products, and to build the cake products, just to give you a sort of comparator, to sell it for 20 bucks, which is expensive, you need to make it for $3 or $4 maximum.
Mm.
And those are not the best, most fun materials, right? And so to make the cars really good, our BOM cost had to be like $15-$20 absolutely maximum to make $100 toy, and no one wants to buy $100 toy.
Mm.
So there's a disconnect there, right? Which is why, so something like Little Bits, which was absolutely brilliant, and just I loved everything about that company, couldn't get it over the line because the individual components were like 25 bucks each, and it doesn't feel good to buy somebody a $25 toy that's like this big and hand it to them and be like, happy birthday, unless they already have the $200 set, but people don't
Mhm.
want to buy the $200 set, right? So that that's kind of where it was, and how things sort of shook out for us. And then, like I said, we ultimately just couldn't raise enough money to make it happen. And when that happened, when I started to realize that Racy was not going to make it, I said, okay, how do I shut down my company? And there was just nothing. There's no advice. People tell you to kind of go on a government website and look at the rules for doing things, but shutting down a startup is different than shutting down like, a massive corporation that has multiple accountants and lawyers and all of those things. If you're essentially mom and pop organization, you really struggle to find the resources to shut things down because they are kind of obscure. And what's interesting is, of course, everyone has been through it. And I talk about it, it's a little like a miscarriage. Like, no one talks about miscarriage until you
Mm.
say that you've had one. And then everybody's like, oh, I had one, and this is what happened to me. And you suddenly find out it's incredibly common. So when you're in startup land, you have to perpetuate the fiction that everything is wonderful and perfect and going well and you're crushing it. So everyone around you is doing that same dance, right? I'm amazing. I'm raising money. Everything's brilliant. And once you start to shut down, you can't have that conversation anymore, right? You are no longer crushing it. So you cannot have that conversation anymore. So there's shame in saying, I failed
Mm.
and I'm shutting down. So it's really, really hard to get at the examples and the experiences of people who have already done that. And in the time since I wrote my thing on the shutdown, some other people have come out of the woodwork, and actually I would like somebody else to either take my work and grow it or do their own thing. But we do need a kind of central repository of shutdown information,
Mm.
um, because it has changed a little bit, but everybody who goes through it, it's like they're going through it for the very first time in the history of startups, and that's not okay. Yeah, 90% fail. We know that this is what happens. We know that there are all of these resources that are devoted to helping you get going and getting, all the lawyers will come and help you sort of do all of the things. But usually by the time you're shutting down, you don't have a lot of money left.
Mhm.
And so paying someone to help you shut this down, like paying the accountants and the lawyers and everybody, um, can be a major drain. And also, people are like, oh, just declare bankruptcy. No, it's expensive. It's actually very expensive and time consuming to declare bankruptcy. It is no just thing. Um, so yeah, so I think there is still a lot of value there, and I want more people to pull together to talk about shutting down a startup, because it's incredibly financially taxing and also emotionally taxing. And I think we don't talk about that very much either.
True.
Um,
Mental health is just kind of starting to become a big topic among tech workers, I think,
yeah,
and people who are in tech and founders and things.
yeah. And I think you and I had touched on this briefly in our emails in
Mhm.
advance of this, but and maybe things are changing now, but when I was building my startup, so much of the startup was, and sort of promotion for the startup, particularly before you are properly launched and out in the world, is you as a founder representing your brand, and you as a founder getting kind of subsumed into your brand, and the two become conflated, and then you sort of lose yourself as a person separate from your work. And so
Mhm.
when your startup fails, it is very, very hard to think that you have not personally failed and that you
Besides
are not a personal failure.
Yeah, and it also seems to link in with what you were talking about with like this effect where if you are in a minority in the tech world, then you're sort of seen as a representative of that group and not just an individual, and so you feel like you're kind of letting down the group as a whole, or like, I've definitely had that feeling where I had to seem as competent as possible to
Right.
prevent reflecting poorly on my demographic. And it's,
Yes.
I know it's not just women, it's like all kinds of people who are minoritized and yeah.
Yes. Oh, minoritized is an excellent word for that. Yeah.
I forget where
Because
I heard that, I should know, but
I I just assume I stole it from a black woman on Twitter because they're
that's what
cooler
I
than me.
believe I did, yeah, and I regret not knowing exactly who it was,
Um,
but yeah,
yeah, no, the
so
post
much
that
good
you're
stuff
showing
in
right
here.
now was um, I a VC had posted me. It wasn't Albert Wenger. It was his partner, whose name I suddenly cannot remember,
Mm.
um, onto his site, and I got this, response back from someone who initially was like, "Oh, this is interesting and this is fine, but what you need to understand is that what you're dealing with are ohms, and just so you know, that's not what they say in yoga. It's an electronics term." And I was like, "Oh, here we go."
Oh,
5 pages later, he
oh
kept going, and it's a thing. You get a different response. As a minoritized person, um, and which is why some of the stuff that I do, I before we talked, I was like, oh, I'm kind of a fraud, right? Because I base a lot of my work on tutorials, right? I get a lot from tutorials. I get a lot from YouTube. I get a lot from the Adafruit tutorials, from the Hackster tutorials, um,
no, yeah.
and there is this idea that we're supposed to know as opposed to we're supposed to learn.
Whereas, especially in software, it's kind of become accepted that, 90% of, maybe not 90%, but like a big part of software development, I want to get back to this later, but for now, is, Googling stuff, like looking stuff up on
Hmm.
Stack Overflow. And like, you don't have to hold all this stuff in your head. Like yes, it's important to like know sort of the structure of how stuff goes together and know the kind of like the ideas of how to put it together and to know it's like a language, you can't just have a dictionary and a book of grammar, but like it definitely really, you know,
Yeah,
once you've got some of the stuff in your brain, you like know where to look, you know how to put it
exactly.
together, and like you don't have to have it all up there. There's a
Yeah.
another really good one here that I wanted to just you've got a really cool article about um this part in particular. Don't teach your children how to think like computers, teach them how to think like the people who invented computers in the first place. I think this is becoming huge, especially now where young people are learning increasingly from touch screens and things where they're not interacting with a file system and they don't really know what like saving is. And I know there's a lot of like kids these days stuff about that, but also like it's kind of how we're raising them. And I'm really curious about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in particular, right, with the advent of ChatGPT,
Mm,
and the other chatbots, one of the things that's interesting to me is that, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying in terms of sort of Googling and knowing the difference in like being able to find
yes.
out and sort of having to have it all in your head, is that the way that the tools are effective is if you know how to ask the right kind of questions. And so on the one hand, like the chatbots are teaching us how to talk to them, right? Because you have to phrase the question the right
Mm.
way. But you also need to know enough to ask the right kind of questions. So I used ChatGPT on the Dungeons and Dragons cake because I wanted to do a code kind of pattern that was more complicated than I'm used to, right? I needed it to do multiple things at once and sort of switch back and forth between multiple ideas. And so, or functions really. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to ChatGPT and see if it can help me. And it did, mostly because I knew how to ask the right questions, right? I knew enough. And the same thing when you're working with consultants, if you're working with electronics consultants, or any of the kind of industrial design consultants, all those folks, they will give you exactly what you ask for, exactly.
Yeah, it's like I do remember doing exercises, in school where, like, you have a partner and you tell them how to make a peanut butter sandwich as though they were a computer and, the hijinks ensue.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
And so yeah, that idea of you have to teach people how to think first, and then they can apply that to anything. So like my training is in medical anthropology. That's
Ooh.
yeah, so that my PhD is from Columbia in medical anthropology, and I started my work actually working predominantly in kind of prisons and halfway houses and drug treatment centers, working with drug using mothers. And what that does, in terms of as an anthropologist, what you learn to do is ask a lot of questions, really listen to the answer, and then try and make sense of the world in the way that somebody else would make sense of their world, right? So you
Mm.
can find logic in the choices that people make if you actually try and understand how they live and work, and the effects that their sort of larger social order has on them, right? So the in the case of drug using mothers, one of the things that I found was that the choices that they make about their children are based very much on the external forces that determine how much control they have over their children. And so there was always an internal logic, you just had to find it. And so that skill, the
Yeah.
anthropology skill, is finding the internal logic. And that actually is incredibly applicable to multiple fields. It's a lot like journalism. It's a lot like any field where you have to ask questions of something else and try and understand it. And so it's actually one of the reasons I like the work that I do with the cakes, because it's a little bit anthropology, because I get to go talk to someone and say, what will make you laugh? What will amuse you? What will
Yeah.
make you happy? What are you looking at? And then how will you connect with this? And then it's constant problem solving and saying, how can I make sense of the stuff in front of me? How can I make it make sense in a different way? How can I ask questions that will bring me to super fun, interesting answers? So, I didn't have to learn how to code. I had to learn how to ask the questions so that I could make the code do what I needed it to do.
And there's an aspect as well as, of being able to catch why it doesn't work, because these things often, like, they don't necessarily work all the way, or they've got something that they're doing wrong, and being able to, like, catch that and, like, refine it and turn it into something that does work is also a big part of the skill set. But what you just said is just, that's gonna be in my brain for a long time. I'm gonna cut that out and put it as its own little clip because that's amazing.
Thanks.
I wanna make okay, so I've got a lightning round, since we're coming to the end here, but I also wanna make sure that we make space to talk about this because you were really excited about it, and I am too.
An escape room cake.
Ah!
The party was in an escape room. So of course the cake has to be an escape room too. Um, it's a perspex box, acrylic
Mhm.
box, and you can see the cake and you can have your cake. You just have to get to it first. And so I worked on that one with my friend Chris Rill, who is again phenomenal. And he and I work really well together because he I come up with a crazy idea, and then he comes up with a crazier one. And so we make each other worse, which is great. But um, for that one, it was a combination of a keyboard that actually played notes, because the birthday kid for that one is sort of very, very musically inclined, and so really hears songs and music all the time.
Mm.
Um, and so it was a combination of a playable keyboard box,
Wow.
and that letter that's on the front there was a series of clues, but it was sort of written as a letter from the parents being like, "Oh, we hope that you love this," and da da da. And all of it was actually musical clues. So, like, we don't talk about Bruno. Thank you for being a friend. The final countdown, and I think there was another one, but I can't remember what it was. And so, if they played the notes right, it would set off one of the actions. So there was UV lights, there was a smoke machine, and there was a servo. So the first lock was a servo, and now all that had to do was open up and close. Right, fairly simple. If you played We Don't Talk About Bruno, it would set off the smoke machine, because I told you we don't talk about Bruno. But my favorite part of that whole cake is that on the front of the cake are stenciled letters, and they look exactly like the rest of the cake, and there's just tons of letters. But if you triggered the UV lights,
Yes.
some of the letters glow in the dark, while glow in the UV. And those letters are the combination to the lock. And so that one was a mix of trying to find lots of different um, glow in the dark things, like sort of compounds, that would mix well with icing, still show through the icing, not mess with the flavor of the icing, and not change the color of the
Ooh.
icing. So I used vitamin B initially, but vitamin B tastes like pants.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just gross. And it was very orange. Or maybe
Mm.
that was the one that I had, but it was very orange. I tried Monster Energy drinks as well because those also glow. Also
Huh.
nasty, just disgusting. And they weren't concentrated enough to get
Mm.
the glow without the changing the color. So what I did was use tonic water,
Yes.
which I boiled down into a syrup,
Oh,
which was
wow.
clear, tasted actually kind of nice. It has like a lemony flavor to it when you boil it
Mm.
down, but it glows beautifully under UV light. So I gave the kids a little taste of their future gin and tonic in their cake. But it was such a tiny amount that you couldn't really taste it, and it was only a couple of the letters that had that on it. But I that was definitely one of my favorite things. Yeah. So how to make tonic water glow?
It's got this I love I've also tried a couple of different glowy food things, and tonic water for me, it just has the best color. It's so,
Yes.
like, sci-fi,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
your
and
cake is
because
so
it does that.
sci-fi.
Thank you. And I just, anything where it's gonna have like smoke and lights and, it's super fun.
I was almost
Um,
wondering if it had, like, a laser trap maybe for the next one. Well, you did have some kind of a wavy thing, right? Like a
I'm trying to
gesture
remember.
control? Ah, maybe not.
No, I mean, I have had a gesture control. But that was a reed switch with a magnet that
Ah,
made a
nice,
thing go
yeah.
spinny. I did laser maze at a kid's party once, though. I did set up a kid's party with a laser maze. That was super fun.
You must be the
Um,
best person at parties, oh my gosh. But
can I just tell you how
yeah.
much I hate making a cake and then going to the party? That's
Are you just,
incredibly
like, gnawing
stressful.
your fingernails like, "Is it gonna work?"
Yeah.
Or well, they look amazing, and I bet
Thank you.
seeing the reactions is just
It is kinda great. Yeah.
s
Um,
okay, I got a lightning round for you.
okay, go.
Are you ready? Okay, cool. So, what's the next thing you wanna learn that would level up your game?
I wanna learn how to make a selfie, cake. So I need to
Ooh,
know so I think for that, I'm gonna need to know how to use Raspberry Pi, which is not something I know how to do.
cool. Um, what was your first professional cake job?
I think it was the Cindy Gallop, apartment with the fireplace and the skyline behind it, and that one I worked with Natasha Zerny on that one.
Cool.
Techno
Oh,
chic. Yeah,
yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay, next. I've gotta juggle all my stuff here, sorry. Favorite flavor of cake? What's your favorite?
Um,
I'm assuming you like cake, but
I do like cake. I like a classic chocolate, but like a really rich chocolate, like a really gooey rich
Ooh,
chocolate, but it has to have a
yeah.
vanilla icing so that there's balance. I like
Huh.
balance.
I'm totally not on the balance chain. Chocolate all the way. Although German chocolate is amazing with that
That's
coconut.
true.
Okay. Um, what type of laser cutter and 3D printer do you have, and what do you use for software with them?
I have the Ultimaker 2 Plus that I actually bought at the Little Bits fire sale.
Ah,
Um, and I have a Flux BMO. Um, I use Tinkercad for all of my designs because I'm too lazy to learn Fusion 360 because it makes
it's
me have a headache.
efficiency. You know how to allocate your energy.
Exactly. And I wish I could figure out how to use some of the kind of profiles that other people have built. So like Chuck, whose last name I can't pronounce, it's like Hellet Book. How do you say that?
Hmm.
Has done like a bunch of printer profiles, but I don't think any of them work on the Ultimaker. Because I'm not. I just use Cura on my Ultimaker because
Nice.
again, it just works more or
Also, what is this?
less. Okay, so another playable cake, exploding kittens.
Oh, I thought it looked like the oatmeal style.
Yes, so you slam the button, it
Oh, I see it now.
chooses. Again, Chris Real and I worked on this one together, and then there's a little sprinkle fountain in the center. Yeah, and actually, yeah, my buddy in Australia, the Russell Monroe. I had built the sprinkle fountain before, and he took it and made it actually really good, like because he's a mechanical engineer and knows how to do that. Um, so he made like a tornado system under there that so that the sprinkles would go flying up. So when the kitten exploded, it actually went, which was fun.
Awesome. Exploding Kittens card game. I'm not finding a good part of this page to show, but it's a thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
uh, Another question. Your dream tool for your lab.
Oh, bigger apartment.
Oh yeah, that's real.
Yeah, this is an 9 by 9 space. So it's very small, and there's a desk in here that I'm sitting on, and then that desk, because I'm actually sitting at my husband's desk because we work back to back, because it's New York City, and so it's tiny. Um, but yeah, that would be my dream tool is an empty table. That's my dream tool, is an empty table.
I love that. What do you call your lab? Do you call it a lab? Do you call it a makerspace? What do you?
We call it just the office, which is
Oh, okay.
lame. That's so lame. Um, but or the workshop.
Ah, the
When
workshop.
my
See,
husband's up here, it's the office. When I'm up here, it's the workshop.
I think one of the key reasons to have a nickname for it is so that you can make a cute little sign for the door, which I haven't actually done here. I'm in the attic, but you know, whatever. I think that's all oh, okay, one last one. I know you've already been down the hardware startup founder rabbit hole, and maybe you're like, maybe
Broken.
never again. But you make such amazing, and this one that you showed with the like sort of self-contained thing with the sound in it and stuff. It, it's very easy to say that would make an amazing product or an amazing kit, and I know that like that's not always realistic. But have you thought about it?
I have thought about it. I would still actually love to do it. I would love to find a way of partnering with a manufacturer who would understand the needs, because I worked with, so Russell and I had spoken to a couple of toy manufacturers, because we
Hmm.
both do sort of electronic-y, robotic-y connected cakes. Well, his moving and mine connected. And any mass market toy manufacturer doesn't know how to make what we want to make
Mm.
well, because again, that BOM cost has to be so tiny that you're not really getting good materials. But I would love to work with a manufacturer who would understand the need for like a specialty version of this, because I do think there are some fun products there, and I would love to see more people make playable food. I think it would be great. There's some fun stuff that I have that's like really simple, just like a spinny thing, a lighty thing. That would be
Mhm,
great.
mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah, if there's any secret manufacturers floating around want to work with me, I would love that.
You have so many cool little terms. You said playable food, and it goes right up there with like confectionery roboticist and engineer of joy. Everyone, of course, Abigail's website is engineerofjoy.com. For now, for now.
For now,
Uh,
until it's dimensional sugar or not.
yeah,
Um,
we've
and
also
actually,
got.
can I tell you the
Oh,
secret thing that I
please.
really want? My
Yes.
kind of ultimate vision is that I would love to build a studio of amazing baker decorators and amazing technologists, so that we can
Mm.
come together and just build really weird stuff.
It sounds like an amazing like
Really weird.
artist residency kind of
Yes.
program. Oh,
It'd be so fun.
I want
I
that.
just want to build really weird stuff largely.
I love it. Yeah, so in the comments we've got, or in the description we've got your Instagram, we've got engineerofjoy.com, we've got your Medium profile, and now you've got a Hackster profile with the playable Dungeons and Dragons cake on it. Um, let's see, is there anything you'd like to throw in there before we wrap up?
I think you're awesome and you're my favorite,
Aw,
and I love watching your stuff.
oh
I'm just
yay!
like, why does she know how to do all of these things? She's so cool. So
I'm the
I
same
am
though. I didn't go to
delighted.
college for this. We're all learning, teaching ourselves.
Yay for self-taught weirdos. Yay.
Self-taught weirdos. That's another like 100% banger. All right. Thank you so much, Abigail. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been awesome. We'd love to have you back when you have a new cake. Have an awesome rest of your Tuesday, everybody, and hack on!